As our need for electricity increases, solar power is increasingly seen as the future of renewable green electricity generation. Every hour more solar energy reaches the Earth than the whole world uses in a year, but it has two big drawbacks. Firstly, our atmosphere. 30% of the sun's energy is reflected before it even hits the ground. Then, of course, nighttime. No sun, no power. In the northern latitudes, where most of the power is used, winter nights are long, dark and cold, and that's exactly when you need it. But if we were to move the solar power stations into space, the sun's energy would not only be stronger, it would be available 24 hours a day. So will we get our power from space in the future? And what's it going to take to do it? Now this video is being sponsored by NordVPN, which actually brings me on to a quick story before we start. A few weeks ago, whilst I was researching the Why is the HAARP so controversial video, I was checking out a site in Alaska when I got this message saying that I can't have access because I'm based in the EU and that because of EU data regulations, my access was blocked, which was somewhat of a pain. And this is also not the first time that this has happened. In fact, many of the national broadcasters like the BBC, YouTube and Netflix blocks access to many types of videos because of licensing agreements depending upon where in the world you're actually based. The best way to get around this is to hide your real location using a VPN or a virtual private network. This allows you to log on to a private network in your country, but then appear as if you're in another country. Not only does this allow you to get around the censors, but it also encrypts your connection to protect your identity and data from hackers and eavesdroppers, especially if you're using one of the free public Wi-Fi points in places like hotels, airports, cafes and hospitals, for example. Now my old VPN, which I won't mention, is okay, but it's quite slow sometimes and it's also a bit clunky. So when NordVPN asked me if I would like to try their service, I thought, well, why not? And I must admit, it has a lot more features. It's also much faster and their 3-year deal is also quite a bit cheaper. It also allows up to 6 devices, including smartphones, to connect through a single account, so the rest of the family can use it at no extra expense. So is it good? Well, I think so, but you don't have to take it from me. NordVPN has been voted #1 at vpnmentor.com and also won Best VPN Award at CES 2019. And now you can get 75% off the 3-year plan plus the first month for free by using the coupon code CuriousDroid at the address now shown. So there's no excuse for not trying it. And with my VPN issues sorted, let's get on with the video. So what is a space-based solar power station? Well, the basic idea is similar to solar power stations or solar farms here on Earth. Large amounts of solar cells capture the uninterrupted sun's energy and convert it into electricity. This is then used to create a microwave or laser beam which is pointed at a specific receiving target here on Earth. When it's recaptured here on Earth, the microwaves or laser light is then converted back into normal electrical energy where it can be fed into the supply grid. The beauty of this is that the energy could be beamed to remote places on the planet where conventional power grids might not be available, and there are no greenhouse emissions or pollution. Now, space power stations are not a new idea. The first mention of them was in Isaac Asimov's 1941 short story Reason, in which a space station supplies energy to the planet by a microwave link. The microwave link borrows from Nikola Tesla's idea of transmitting power wirelessly, but of course at the time we hadn't even reached space, so it remained just a sci-fi story. But by 1968 we were in the midst of the space race, and the technology had moved on enough for Czech-born American scientist and aerospace engineer Peter Glaser to put forward the idea of a satellite solar power system. And in 1973, he patented a method of transmitting power from space to Earth's surface by microwaves. Although the idea has been bandied about since the 1970s, the costs of just getting the materials into space to build a big enough solar collector have vastly outweighed even the most expensive renewable Earth-based systems, let alone the technical challenges of beaming back gigawatts of energy. But technology doesn't stand still, and in the intervening years, both it and the cost of getting into space have changed dramatically. SpaceX is proving that the cost of access to space is no longer the biggest hurdle, and space technology has come a long way in making components much smaller and lighter. So what was once a pipe dream is now being seriously considered by some countries around the world. Now I can almost hear the cries of, "What? High-power microwaves and lasers in space?" This looks like a death ray pretending to be a peaceful power system, so it's worth explaining why these systems are chosen. Now back on Earth, if you build a solar power station, all you need to do to connect its output to the electricity grid is to wire it up using electrical cabling. But if your solar power station is 36,000 kilometers away in space in geosynchronous orbit, or even in low Earth orbit, you can't connect it by wires. But you can transmit the power using another medium. Now, radio waves are not just for receiving your favorite satellite channel or connecting your smartphone to the internet. They are electromagnetic energy, and if you transmit them in the right way with enough power, you can capture most of that radiated energy with the right kind of receiver. But you can't just broadcast radio signals everywhere. You would lose the vast amount of energy as it just spreads out in all directions. So it has to be focused into a beam, much like a torch focuses the light from its bulb. Beaming the signal from space poses two issues. The greater the distance, the more the beam will spread out, so a station in geosynchronous orbit will have a beam much wider when it gets to Earth than one in low Earth orbit. Then there's the Earth's atmosphere, which, depending upon the frequency of the radio signals, can have a major impact on how much energy will be absorbed before it even reaches the receiver. There are two methods of transmission that could be used. One uses laser light, which would be in a low Earth orbit, and the other uses microwaves, which would be farther out in a geostationary orbit. Laser light is highly focused, which is good. The width of the beam would be just a couple of meters across, so both the laser transmitter and receiver on Earth would be small. A 1 gigawatt laser could be as small as 1 meter across, and the receiver may be 100 meters across. Solar power stations in low Earth orbit, 400 kilometers above, would also be easier and cheaper to deploy and repair if required. By using near-infrared lasers, the beam would be mostly unaffected by the atmosphere too. One problem about being so close to the Earth though is that the orbit would be once every 90 minutes, so you would need multiple stations around the world where the laser could be beamed down to. It would first lock onto one station, then as it moved around the world, move its beam to lock onto another, and then the next station, and so on and so forth. Microwaves, on the other hand, have a much longer wavelength, and in the 3 to 6 GHz band pass unaffected through clouds and rain, so bad weather is not a problem. But because the wavelength of microwaves is much longer, so the antennas and receivers would also be much larger. The receiver, or the rectenna on the ground, could be up to 10 kilometers in diameter, because the beam would also be much more spread out. But as the solar power station would be in geosynchronous orbit 36,000 kilometers out, it will be over one spot all the time, and so it could supply a continuous beam of energy day and night. These microwave solar power stations would be large structures with mirrors up to several kilometers in diameter, but the power that could be transmitted back could be several gigawatts. That's as much as an average nuclear power station. To make a 1 gigawatt solar power station would require 10 million 100-watt transmitters, which would act as one huge phased array. That's an antenna that can be steered electronically without moving, and could be synchronized with the others so that the whole signal is in phase, which in itself would be another technical challenge. To make sure that the beam doesn't drift off course, the receiving station would send up a pilot signal to the solar power station, which it would then follow. It would shut the beam down if it lost the pilot signal. The pilot signal would also allow each of the sub-transmitters to adjust the phases of the signal so that they would all be in phase and wouldn't lose energy by cancelling each other out. Even though the total power might be high, it would be spread out over a large area, so the intensity of the energy would be somewhere around about 1,000 watts of power per square meter in the centre of the beam. That's the same energy level as the midday sun at the equator. This means that you wouldn't be cooked if you crossed the beam, and birds wouldn't be falling out of the sky looking like roast chickens. The receivers would also be restricted areas, much like other industrial processes, and workers could work in the beam using EMF shielded clothing that creates a wearable Faraday cage. Currently, several institutions, including Caltech and the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the US and JAXA in Japan, are working on practical systems. To overcome the cost of transporting components into space, the Livermore labs have been working on self-assembling solar collectors and compact high-power lasers. These would effectively unfold themselves from a small package, which could be carried on a normal space launch in one go. This would suit the laser systems, but the large microwave power stations would still require a lot of infrastructure to be lifted into geosynchronous orbit. Caltech have been working on the creation of highly efficient combined solar cells and microwave transmitters. These small generation and transmission blocks will be bolted together to create much larger phased arrays. But the country which would gain the most from this technology is Japan, which lacks both natural resources and usable land area, and after the Fukushima disaster is looking at renewable alternatives to nuclear power. JAXA, the Japanese space agency, is looking to deploy a 1 gigawatt solar power station by the 2030s, but there is still a lot of work to be done before they can get there. Japanese engineers have already been conducting tests to wirelessly transmit power over larger and larger distances with greater power on the ground. The first solar power station tests with a 100 kilowatt station are due to start in the 2020s. If all goes well, then a 2 megawatt and then a 200 megawatt version will follow before the construction of a 1 gigawatt version, which will most probably have to be an international consortium due to the size of the project. So what do you think of solar power stations? Will they be the future of our electrical supply? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to check out some of our other videos if you get a chance, and don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up and share.